Coming up.
The proposal of moving the election date back a week from October 20th to October 27th did get, and has got, rightfully so, a lot of negative feedback, not on the Diwali aspect so much as what was seen as moving the election date back a week for pension guarantees for MPs that don't have, would miss it otherwise by a day. I just want to ask for you to be on the record.
What it really is a pensions bill disguised as an elections bill, because buried within this so-called elections bill is a clause that would secure the pensions of soon-to-be defeated Liberal MPs.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
I'd like to welcome from Apathy is Boring, Samantha Royce, the Executive Director. Appearing as an individual, Daniel Mulroy, a lawyer who is appearing by video conference. And from the Indo-Caribbean Educators Network, Peter DeBoren, Principal, retired member of the Steering Committee, who is also appearing by video conference. Mr. Duncan, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us this afternoon. Mr. DeBoren, I want to ask a question, as you've outlined and gave a very good, we're always learning new things, some more details about Diwali. And you mentioned that by the proposal of moving the election date back a week from October 20th to October 27th did get, and has got, rightfully so, a lot of negative feedback, not on the Diwali aspect so much as what was seen as moving the election date back a week for pension guarantees for MPs that don't have, would miss it otherwise by a day. I just want to ask for you to be on the record. In order to not conflict with Diwali next year and the fixed election date, the only option is not just to move it back 1 week to October 27th, as was proposed by the NDP and Liberals. In fact, the election date could be moved and advanced ahead to not conflict with the Diwali and the celebrations that go on. Now, 1 week before would be Monday, October 13th, would be Thanksgiving. I think we would agree that would not be an ideal time. But if I were to say Monday, October the 6th, would that be a date that would not conflict and be appropriate as well?
Absolutely. The main concern for many of the thousands of people who were conflicted by this is, like I said, on the one hand, we have a country that purports to say we're multicultural and respect all cultures and faiths and traditions. And yet, on the other hand, there was this arbitrary date that was chosen. So I believe, yes, I think the October 6th would work very well.
I appreciate that. And one of the things I say about Diwali, too, is a multi-day celebration. I know in my part of Eastern Ontario, I always have an interesting Thanksgiving weekend where on Saturday I have a Thanksgiving meal with my family, and then I go to a large Diwali celebration at the Benson Centre in Cornwall. So I appreciate your clarification there that the election date did not need to move back a week in order to accommodate what you have requested. In fact, the fixed date could be moved ahead to any other time besides the 20th. So I appreciate you clarifying that for us. Ms. Rush, I want to ask... thank you.
Like you, I come from a multi-faith family, so we also celebrate Thanksgiving as well as Diwali.
A busy weekend for all of us. Good. Ms. Rush, I want to ask you actually a bit of a different angle on youth being involved in our democratic process. You've mentioned and highlighted in your opening statement about voting, which is obviously very key of getting younger people to cast a ballot. One of the other things I think that's interesting and hasn't been discussed or raised too much yet in our deliberation of C-65 is actually young people working for Elections Canada and participating through employment if they're students or looking for part-time work or extra hours. One of the things I want to raise or flag and maybe get your initial opinion on is in the proposal, section 31.2 of the bill, we're adding 2 extra advance poll days. One of the concerns I have, and I'll ask Mr. Mulroy maybe in his work as a lawyer and for disability rights, both for young people, those with disabilities, seniors. Having 4 days of advance polls now requires somebody to work 48 hours over 4 days. The polls are open 12 hours per day. Now by going to 6, the way that it's written, and if Elections Canada doesn't change their employment rules, we're asking either a young person, a person with disabilities, a senior, to work 72 hours over 6 days, plus their travel time each day, plus setup and takedown, plus the training. Do you see that if we don't get some change in, I think, what's been done before, we're going to see young people not participate by being able to work the elections as well and participate in that aspect of our democracy?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. I don't have an easy answer to this question. I know it's something that we're working with Elections Canada on to recruit more young people to work at the elections. I hadn't considered the time frame of the extra working hours. I'd be happy to submit a longer response in writing, but my initial thought is just that perhaps there could be additional recruitment done, but I'm not sure about the exacts.
And I think that's one of the things we should get clarification on, because if we're asking that requirement as what's been done with the 4 days and there's not a change to the 6, we might see all demographics, not just young people, but saying I can't do 72 hours over 6 days plus the other requirements. And we face further challenges to voting accessibility if there's not enough poll workers in local communities and neighborhoods to do that. Mr. Mulroy, can I ask you from your end and your work as for disability rights and your work as a lawyer, from an employment perspective as well with Elections Canada, would that be a flag to you and something we should be getting some clarification or details from Elections Canada on how they would handle this advanced poll day change?
I mean, it's certainly outside of my expertise, but you've raised an interesting question in that it may, so getting more information on that would likely be beneficial.
Appreciate that.
From an accessibility perspective, I mean, the more days that an individual is able to vote is certainly the better. But again, the system that's being purported is in-person paper ballots, which still has a number of barriers for persons with disabilities.
And just recognizing my time, I'll just say on there, I'd be interested in any comments that the witnesses would have in writing afterwards on this. I call it an undercurrent of some of these bills of where we have good, good intentions, not saying there's not on adding advanced poll days, but we need to make sure we have sufficient election workers, that there's polls in neighborhoods close to people where they live and accessible in that format. So any comments you may have on the employment side and the accessibility of polls close to home would be much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Romanato, the floor will be yours.
I just want to follow up on something that my colleague MP Duncan mentioned. He mentioned in his line of questioning to advance the date, perhaps the week of October 13th. Obviously, we cannot. It is both Thanksgiving and on Monday, October 6th, is actually Sukkot, a Jewish high holiday. The week prior is September 30th, Truth and Reconciliation in Newfoundland and Labrador municipal elections. Week prior to that is Rosh Hashanah, and on September 1st is Labor Day. So I've looked at the length of the campaign. It has to be between 37 and 51 days. Mathematically, I looked at all of the Mondays in the fall, and unfortunately, there are many, many Mondays that have conflicts. But further to that, my question is actually for Ms. Rouche. I hope I said it right. I had the great pleasure of being on the Electoral Reform Committee back in 2016. And Apathy is Boring presented to us actually at that time, and it was on October 3rd, 2016 in Montreal. At the time, Caroline Lutfi presented to us, and we heard from her that, and you mentioned something along these lines, that if youth don't vote in their first two elections upon eligibility, then it's very likely they will not continue to vote. And at that time, it was suggested that perhaps we should look at piloting online voting. You didn't mention that in your remarks. You did mention the weekend voting, which I'll get to. But what are your thoughts on that? It's not something that we did recommend at that time for many reasons, including now we see a lot more with respect to foreign interference in elections, and the use of cyber attacks. But what are your thoughts on that? You didn't mention it, and I just wanted to see if there's been a change in your position on that.
Thank you for that question. We don't have a formal position on online voting at the moment. I think it's something that, to my knowledge, hasn't been explored by Elections Canada up to this point, and so it feels like something that's quite far away. I know some provinces are piloting various methods. I think similar to you, obviously ensuring that the elections are secure and that Canadians and electors have faith in the results and how they're counted is paramount for us, given that we've seen, especially since 2016, declining trust in our elections, and we have a fear that that declining trust could extend to electoral administration, as we've seen in other parts of the world. And so I think that would be a primary consideration that I would just name, and that in any study that's done with respect to online or other forms of ballots or voting, that be considered as well.
Weekend voting, I know that at the time electoral reform, there was a lot of concerns for people who, especially young people who work on weekends, that they go to school during the week, so on weekends, that is their only opportunity to, work, to be able to pay for their studies. And we also heard from gig workers, people who work in, whether it be the retail industry and so on and so forth, as well as people who work the Monday to Friday 9 to 5, saying the only days I have off are the Saturday, Sunday. I have to do the grocery and the laundry and clean the house and so on. So they actually prefer to keep it on the Monday. Is this still, in your experience, the feeling that you're hearing? Do you have any data to support why we should move to weekend voting?
Thank you for that question. As I said, in our experience and research that we've done, we found that almost 80% of young people felt that weekend voting would make it easier for them to participate. Everyone has different circumstances. There are many young people who work, as you say, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and having 2 days as opposed to one, I think, is beneficial. I know there are some challenges with 3-day voting, particularly around polling stations and leasing and various administrative elements that are a little bit outside my scope, but I think it's important that we study and consider the different options, which would include weekend voting.
Ms. Roosh, you had talked about the importance of on-campus voting, and I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more. Some of the things that I've heard from students is not only the accessible option for them to be able to cast their ballot while on campus, but also to see the community coming on campus to participate in this, very important democratic process of casting your ballot. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more around how important it is that we see on-campus ballot offered consistently every time that there's an election happening.
Yeah, certainly, and I definitely agree with those assessments, and I'll actually add that I think one of the barriers that we see with students in particular, and as was mentioned previously, voting in your first 2 elections can set a habit for lifelong participation. So it's a really key time to sort of get voters voting in their first election. And on campus, or students, who are studying away from home for the first time, often it's like a big change in their lives, and they're likely living away from home for the first time, and so there are some unique barriers there around not being certain which riding they should vote in, which one they're registered in, whether it's at home with mom and dad or, in their new home, whether or not, they may not receive a voter information card for that reason. They may not have their parents there to remind them. So sort of adding these on-campus polling stations allows for that community to spring up around them, but also allows them to vote in their home riding in the riding they're registered, which could be not in the riding they're residing in, or could be there, but at least provides the resources to help them figure that out and allow them to cast their ballot and exercise their charter rights in that way.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barron. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I'll be moving the following motion. That given that the committee has learned that staff from the Prime Minister's office and the Office of the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs met with NDP party representatives from the PCO and the Chief Electoral Officer on January 25, 2024 on matters relating to Bill C-65, and that the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, along with his Parliamentary Secretary and staff from his office and the Parliamentary Secretary's office met with NDP party representatives, an NDP Member of Parliament, representatives from the PCO and the Chief Electoral Officer on March 30th, 2024 on matters relating to Bill C-65, the Committee A, order the Office of the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs and the PMO to provide the committee with all of the dates on which any representatives from the Liberal Party, including party officials, ministers, parliamentary secretaries, ministers' office staff, and members of Parliament met with any representatives from the NDP, including party officials and members of Parliament on matters relating to Bill C-65, and the names and titles of the individuals who attended those meetings. B, order the production of any documents under the control of the PCO, PMO, any minister's office, and Elections Canada, including any documents used as briefing materials in any of those meetings, and any records of conversations, including emails, text messages, or any other form of communication about those meetings, and any records of discussions that took place at those meetings and or decisions that were made at those meetings, and that these documents are to be provided to the clerk with no redactions within 1 week of the adoption of this motion. And C, invite Daniel Blakey, former Member of Parliament for Elmwood Transcona and former Democratic Reform critic for the NDP and co-author of Bill C-65, to appear before the committee on its study of Bill C-65.
Okay. Colleagues, do you have a question?
Non, est-ce que vous voulez que je distribue?
Well, going to just very briefly suspend, because I imagine members do not have a copy of this at the moment, certainly not dans les deux langues officielles. Alors,
Certainly don't have it in both official languages. Ms. Gaudreau, you don't have a copy. Ms. Fortier?
I'm going to suspend briefly. Witnesses, I'm going to forewarn you that I imagine, unfortunately, this is going to potentially take a couple of minutes, and I do not have the ability to extend the meeting today. So
There must be transparency, and that is what this motion provides for, to require the Minister and the Prime Minister's office to disclose just how many meetings were held, to produce any communications surrounding the discussions that led to this pensions bill disguised as an elections bill, and to hear from the co-author of this bill, former NDP MP Daniel Blakey. It's a common sense motion. As the Prime Minister often liked to say, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Well, this will provide a lot of sunshine on what is a very dark and cynical attempt to pad the pockets of Liberal and NDP MPs.
okay, thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. Colleagues, we are at 1 o'clock, and we are out of resources. So I'm going to move to adjourn at this point. Pardon me?
Could we not call the question? There's no other speakers. I pulled my name. If we take 1 minute to poll just to call the question, I think that would be worthwhile.
Well, I'm looking around to see if there are any colleagues that want to speak to this. Ms. Barron?
So if I do have some things to say on this, so do we have the time for me to speak to it? This is what I'm
No,
trying to
we
figure
don't.
out.
So, so just to be clear here, I'm going to move to adjourn the meeting.
Yeah.
If you, because we don't have time, we don't have resources to get into a longer debate. If the meeting is adjourned, then we would have to revisit this if a member wanted to reintroduce the motion and then have a vote at that later date. If there's nobody left on the speaking list right now, then we would have time for that vote, but my sense is you're indicating that you do want to speak, which we don't have time for now, meaning that we will adjourn, we will not have a vote because there'll still be a speaker on the list, which would be you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I
that-
think it's only fair that I be added to the speaking list. And
Okay,
trust.
then in that case, we cannot go to a vote as we have speakers that want to speak to the motion. However, we don't have resources to continue the meeting. So I'm going to move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, colleagues.